Hello! Try that again. Hello! And welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, along with the frog in my throat. And I'm doing my best to cure the coronavirus blues by reading my writing. This week I'm going to be doing another longer piece that will take the entire week, that I'll break up into 5 parts. It's going to be a novella based on Heroes. Back in 2006, NBC debuted a TV show called Heroes, which took the world by storm. Among other things, it kind of made stars out of Zachary Quinto and Hayden Panettiere, who have since gone on to fame and fortune. And Santiago Cabrera, also, who's currently starring in Star Trek Picard, was in it, as well as a whole bunch of other people. Wonderful, wonderful cast of characters throughout. Oh, Masaoka also became a big star after this. And it was about people who had superpowers. It had lots of entertaining cameos by people and guest roles for people, including George Takei and Nichelle Nichols and Bruce Boxleitner and Robert Forster, a bunch of others. So it was the first season was phenomenal. The second, third, and fourth seasons significant, not quite as good, but still pretty impressive. It was the it show in 2006 and 2007, and then kind of wasn't after that, and eventually got canceled. In 2015, NBC decided to revive it, since while superheroes were a big deal in 2006 already, because in the wake of the release of X-Men in 2000 and Spider-Man in 2002, suddenly everybody wanted to do superhero stuff. That kicked into high gear with the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting in 2008 with Iron Man and continuing. And so by the time 2015 rolled around, NBC really figured they should try to, take this property that had already been successful for them once and give it another shot. So they released Heroes Reborn, which was a 13-episode miniseries. Both the original TV show Heroes and the miniseries from 5 years ago, both were very aggressive in keeping their tie-ins consistent with what was going on the show. On Heroes, they did a whole bunch of different comic book stories, which tied directly into the show and actually were referenced on the show. Excuse me, I don't know what. They also did a novel as well that focused on Hero. And that held true again with the miniseries. They hired 6 writers or writing teams to do novellas based on the show that all would tie in directly. We worked very closely with the producers of the show. The person who approved my manuscript was the showrunner. That almost never happens. And we were kept up to date on changes to the script, and were able to make changes to our novellas to accommodate those changes. It was one of the best experiences I've ever had as a tie-in writer. My particular story was called Save the Cheerleader, Destroy the World, which is a play on the Save the Cheerleader, Save the World story that was the catchphrase of season 1 of the original Heroes. And my task was to bridge the gap between the end of the 4th season of Heroes. In fact, one of the chapters I'll be reading shortly is a dramatization of that last scene. The story starts there and continues through to the events of June 13th, 2014, which is more or less where the story of Heroes Reborn begins. So, without further ado, here is my Heroes Reborn novella, Save the Cheerleader, Destroy the World, which I dedicated to Stan, Jack, and Steve. Chapter 1. 12 June 2014. A letter written by Claire Bennet on her laptop. Dear Hammer, I'm writing this on my laptop while I'm 30,000 feet in the air in a private jet. Yes, it's Angela's jet. And no, I still won't call her Grandma. Mom's mom is Grandma. Angela is Angela. I don't care if her son was my biological father. Dad is Dad. My biological father was Nathan. My biological mother was Meredith. And Angela is Angela. And of course, you're Hammer because of that stupid trench coat you always wear. God, you're not even here, and I feel like we're having the same stupid arguments about what to call family. I have no idea when you'll see this letter, or even if you'll care if and when you do. I'm going to upload it to Micah's secure server. Hopefully you'll see it there. Either way, though, I don't know what's going to happen in Odessa. It's supposed to be a big summit about all of us who have powers, or gifts, or special genes, or whatever the latest buzzword is. Evos seems to have stuck. I've hated that word ever since the president first used it. But I hate gifted even more, so I guess Evos it is. This summit is supposed to change everything, to make everything better, to give Evos a chance to make their voices heard. want to be hopeful about it. When I jumped off that Ferris wheel 4 years ago, this was exactly the kind of thing I was hoping for. The reasons for it, though, not so much. Honestly, if I knew then what I know now, I never would have jumped off that Ferris wheel. I would have let Hero take me away along with everyone else. I wish I could just get Hero to take me back in time and let me change it, stop myself from talking to the press that day. But even if I knew where Hero was right now, he wouldn't do it. He's scared to death of stepping on butterflies. He says he's given up time travel because there are always side effects nobody expects. It's funny. I never got that butterfly line of Heroes until the barge. Just before you and I met. I started reading. Before I was on the barge, I never read anything more complicated than a webpage for fun. But books were just something I read for school. But Mohinder and Micah had stocked the barge with so many books, and I started reading them. Ray Bradbury, Ursula Le Guin, Sarah Orne Jewett, J.K. Rowling, Agatha Christie, and Mickey Spillane. Anyhow, there are times when I wish I could go back. But if I change the past, I don't meet you. And in a lot of ways, I'd be okay with that. But if we don't meet, then the twins don't happen. I can't risk that. They're due soon. The twins, I mean. Muffin and Squeaker, Batman and Robin, Brad and Angelina, Hero and Ando. One of these days I'll pick actual names for them. God, I hope my water doesn't break during the summit. That would just be perfect. Anyhow, the main reason why I'm writing you this letter is because I need to tell you everything. Back on the barge, you always said you wanted to know about my life before Central Park. You kept telling me that I was a public figure after that, and so you didn't need to know about that. So I told you all about my life growing up in Odessa, the very same town I'm going to now, and then discovering my powers and going on the run and living in California and going to college, and Siler and Hero and the Petrelli family and the Sullivan Carnival. You told me not to tell you anything about after that because you said you knew it all. But you didn't. You really, really didn't. So I'm going to tell you. Maybe you'll understand then. Maybe you won't. I don't care, but I need you to know. Chapter 2. 7 December 2010. Central Park, New York City. Noah Bennett watched as a couple of uniforms put Samuel Sullivan in the back of a blue and white. He'd be taken to the NYPD's Central Park precinct on the 86th Street transverse to be held until he was released into federal custody. Lauren Ambrose would use her pull at the CIA to take care of that. He looked down at his daughter, Claire. Is everyone safe? Claire nodded as they walked through the Sullivan Brothers Carnival, which had somehow materialized in the middle of the Great Lawn. Yeah. Hero's taking care of them. They'll be fine. Hiro Nakamura had used his teleportation powers to get the carnival's customers and other employees out of harm's way when Samuel had tried to start an earthquake. Who's taking Samuel? Claire asked as the cop closed the blue and white's door and handcuffed Samuel. Is it a new company? That prompted a smile from Noah. As far as he knew, the company he worked for, under the guise of Primatech Paper, was defunct. Though he supposed it's the lone surviving founder, Angela Petrelli, would have kept the corporate entity intact just in case. Aloud, he just said, an old one, riffing on the CIA's long-standing nickname. Lauren called in some favors. Noah noticed that Lauren was giving a formal statement to the press, the only civilians who were still around at this point. What's she telling them? Claire sounded dubious. There was a gas main rupture. Rolling her eyes, Claire said, of course there was. And all the other stuff, the flying, the rumbling, all just special effects put on by a very gifted showman. You still can't see it, can you? That took Noah back. Claire had the patented teenager, you just don't understand, Dad, look on her face. But the tone of her words carried a seriousness that surprised him. No, that wasn't fair. Claire had been through more than any 12 people and had not only survived, but thrived. She was one of the strongest people Noah had ever known, even discounting the regenerative powers that rendered her effectively invulnerable. It made Noah both incredibly proud to be her father and incredibly scared for what more she might have to go through. But he would protect her. That was what he had done from the moment Kaito Nakamura had handed the infant over to him on the roof of the DeVoe building in this very city 18 years ago. He asked her, see what? The future. One where we all get to live out in the open. Claire, you know how I feel about this. He started to walk away. They'd had variations on this argument practically since the moment they were forced out of Odessa. But Claire was insistent. How long can we keep this under wraps? Before Noah could answer, he heard a gaggle of journalists approaching him. Lauren was strolling away, having apparently finished her prepared statement, but as usual, that wasn't enough for the media. Suddenly, Noah found a bevy of microphones shoved in his face, and he had to hold up his hand to avoid the glare reflecting off his horn-rimmed glasses from the camera lights. He blinked spots out of his eyes as the questions started coming. "Excuse me, you were witnesses. What happened?" One of the first things that Eric Thompson had drilled into Noah when he recruited him for the company all those years ago was that if by some strange happenstance he wound up speaking to members of the Fourth Estate, there were only 4 words he should ever say, and he said them now. "I have no comment." Undaunted, another reporter turned to Claire. "Can you tell us what you saw here tonight?" Noah shot Claire a look, suddenly wishing he had Matt Parkman's telepathy so he could transmit the words, "Don't say anything." Luckily, it seemed he only needed the look, as she just muttered what he said. Proudly, Noah smiled and started to walk away. Of course, the reporters kept at it. "Miss, please, you have to have seen something." "Are you sure, miss? You look like you want to say something." Noah turned around. Not only had Claire not moved, but that last reporter was right. She did look like she had something to say. "Don't say anything." "Actually, I do have something to say." Noah winced. His mind immediately started weighing exit strategies, absolutely none of which would work in a huge public park while at least a dozen cameras, both video and still, were pointed right at him and Claire. So he tried a simple fatherly warning. "Claire." She turned to look at him. "You're right. People don't change." Then she walked over to the press. "You want to know what happened here? What really happened here tonight? Keep the cameras on me." And Noah watched in horror as his daughter ran over to the giant Ferris wheel and started to climb it. Noah had seen the videos that Claire and her friend Zach had made of her testing her powers. One of them was of her jumping from a tremendous height and then getting up and walking away like it was nothing. It seemed she was recreating that little experiment for a much wider audience. Lauren had noticed that the press hadn't dispersed after her statement and saw what Claire was doing. She approached Noah. "What's she doing?" "Breaking my heart," was all Noah could say in reply. All eyes were riveted on Claire as she reached the top. Once she clambered to the very highest point of the wheel, she looked down. Noah wasn't sure if she was looking right at him, but he certainly felt the power of her gaze. Every discussion, every argument, every disagreement, every talk they'd had, it had all been theoretical, academic. There was no question in Noah's mind that the general public would need to be sheltered from the gifted people in their midst, as they had been for decades. His daughter was about to change that. The reporters all gasped audibly as Claire jumped off the wheel. She plummeted to the ground like a rocket, yet the fall seemed to be in slow motion to Noah. With that one leap, Claire finally did the one thing that Seiler, the company, Danko and his mercenaries, Ted Sprague, Arthur Petrelli, and Samuel and his carnies hadn't managed to accomplish. Noah could no longer protect her. She landed on the grass and dirt with a sickening crunch. The journalists all looked horrified, but they all ran closer as well, and Noah wondered how many of them were concerned for Claire's safety and how many just wanted to look at the body. But Claire was standing upright before any of them reached her. The act of standing shoved her dislocated left leg back into place, and then she grabbed her misshapen right arm with her left and snapped it into shape with a crack that echoed off the trees and carnival attractions. The reporters were openly gaping. All eyes were on Claire, including, Noah realized, those of the other gifted people who had come to stop Samuel. Hiro and his friend Ando Masahashi were right behind Noah and Lauren, and Peter Petrelli, who was standing by one of the game booths, with Seiler. Noah almost gaped, wondering what the hell he was doing here, standing with Peter like they were old buddies. For her part, Claire was staring right into the camera, unblinking as the light shone in her face, already fully healed from the fall, her visage marred only by leftover blood. "My name is Claire Bennet, and this is attempt number..." She trailed off and chuckled. "I guess I've kind of lost count." Noah sighed and then whispered to Lauren, "Come on. Don't you..." I know what she's going to say, and I can't stop her, not now. But I can minimize the damage. He walked over to Hiro and Ando and spoke to them in Japanese. "We have to get out of here." Ando actually replied in English. "What is she doing?" Somehow Noah didn't feel right giving Ando the same non-answer he'd given Lauren. Falling on her sword. No sense in the rest of you being impaled alongside her. She's made her choice to go public, but that doesn't mean you have to. Ando nodded, but Hiro was raptly watching Claire. Hiro, Ando prompted. Shaking his head, Hiro said in Japanese, yes, Mr. Bennet is correct. For now. But all those people I teleported to safety will not remain quiet about how they escaped the carnival. Noah sighed. He hadn't even considered that. The important thing had been to get the other carnies from Sullivan Brothers and the innocent attendees to safety. In the past, he'd been able to contain such sightings with help from Renee, but even the powerful Haitian couldn't erase the memories of so many hundreds of people, assuming he could even find them all in a city this large. Peter and Siler came over to them. Before Noah or anyone else could speak, Peter held up both hands. I know what you're going to say, but Siler's, well, he's changed. He saved a woman's life today. Ando and I saved many hundreds of lives. Hiro sounded almost petulant. Lauren finally jumped in. We can argue over who saved who later. Right now, all eyes are on Claire, and she seems to want it that way. The rest of you need to get far away from here. Siler nodded. She's right. It may be a brave new world out there, but I, for one, would rather face it on my terms, not the media's. If Claire's family tree comes out, it's going to be a mess, Peter said. It's a mess for later, Noah said. For now, we need to join hands so Hiro can take us far away from here. As everyone did as he advised, Noah heard his daughter say, I can't tell you where we came from, but I can tell you where we are. Here. Most of us are just people, trying to live normal lives, no different from anyone else. I was a cheerleader in high school, and I've gotten to help save the world. It's about time people knew I did that. And also, whatever else Claire was going to say was lost as Hiro grimaced and Central Park disappeared. Chapter 3. 25 January 2011, the White House, Washington, D.C. On the one hand, Claire's heart was beating so hard inside her chest that she felt like her ribcage would explode. Here she was, a simple girl from Texas, standing in the Oval Office, meeting the President of the United States. On the other hand, after being killed during an attempted rape and waking up on an autopsy table with her entire chest cut open, running into a burning building, getting shot, having her brain sliced open, and watching more people than she cared to think about die, from Jackie to her birth mother to her first college roommate, this kind of felt anticlimactic. The large oval-shaped room sported two couches, facing each other perpendicular to a large easy chair, with two more chairs facing it. Behind the easy chair was the president's desk, where the commander-in-chief was sitting as Claire entered, surrounded by half a dozen Secret Service agents, and several men and women in suits. The only one of them she recognized was the vice president. The president got up from his chair and smiled. So, you're the young woman who changed the world. Claire glanced nervously from side to side. I guess? Walking around to the other side of the desk, the president approached Claire, who was standing behind one of the couches. He was even taller in person than he seemed on camera, and he practically loomed over her now. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Miss Bennet. You've created quite a stir. Luckily, it's one we were prepared for. Actually, she said very quietly. She felt weird correcting the president, but this was important. It's Ms. Petrelli. I'm going by Claire Petrelli now. Well, the late Senator Petrelli is the reason why we were so well prepared for this. Claire nodded. Building 26. Yes. The president frowned. How much do you know about that, Ms. Petrelli? I know everything about it. My father worked for it, and my biological father was Senator Petrelli. One of the men in suits stepped forward. The president is asking because your name wasn't in the files that the senator provided, and they were quite comprehensive. My father, Claire smiled, both my fathers have been very protective of me, especially my adopted father. It's to protect him, as well as my mother and brother, that I changed my name. If the press wants to go after my family, let them go after the Petrellis. They can handle it. The president nodded. No doubt. In any case, I'm glad you're here to be one of my Lenny Skutniks for the State of the Union. Claire blinked. I'm sorry? One of the women came to Claire's rescue. Lenny Skutnik was the first special guest in the gallery back in '82. He rescued a woman from the Potomac, dove right in and swam after her and kept her from drowning. Nodding, Claire smiled. A real hero. The vice president said, President Reagan invited him to sit up in the box, and since then every State of the Union's had a guest, including now you, Ms. Petrelli. I'm honored. You should be, the president said. What you did took tremendous courage. I know it hasn't been easy, answering the same questions over and over again, not to mention the medical tests. Actually, those have been fine. She smiled. It's always kind of fun to watch another doctor stare in surprise every time I heal right in front of them. You can rest assured, Ms. Petrelli, that your bravery hasn't gone unnoticed. The reason why I invited you here today to be my guest at the State of the Union is because you and people like you are a big part of my speech. That made Claire more than a little nervous. Are they opening Building 26 for business again? Something worse? Don't worry, the president added quickly. It's nothing you need to be afraid of. I pride myself on not making the same mistake twice. The vice president grinned. We prefer to make newer, more interesting mistakes. Several in the room chuckled at that. Claire, though, was not one of them. The vice president continued. Besides, the cover-ups aren't really tenable anymore, you know? Not that I think you're wrong or anything, sir, Claire said slowly, but why do you say that? Central Park is built on a very large swamp. There are no gas lines under it. Claire winced. Lauren probably had no idea of that when she came up with the cover story, which, to be fair, she had to do on the fly. But it was just another indicator to Claire that she had done the right thing. A short young man walked into the office. Sir, it's time. The president nodded and moved toward the door. Who's the designated survivor this year? One of the women said, the housing secretary. Smiling, the president said, lucky him. This much Claire did remember from school. One member of the cabinet was left in the White House during the State of the Union in case something happened to the House chamber, since pretty much the entire government would be together in one building. She also knew that, since 2001, certain members of Congress spent the evening in undisclosed locations for similar reasons. At the time she learned about the practice, Claire had thought it to be absurdly paranoid. Now, though, she realized it sounded like something her father would have come up with. 10 more Secret Service agents met them outside the Oval Office, and they all moved swiftly through the corridors of the White House. The president was talking to one of the women. Did we get the final notes on the budget section? Amazingly, they said it was fine as is. Really? No one was more surprised than me, Mr. President. Claire realized that, of the 16 Secret Service agents that were surrounding this group of people, 4 of them were very close to her. Are they here to protect me? Or to protect everyone else from me? She was pretty sure it was the latter. The 4 agents maneuvered her toward a long line of limousines parked outside the White House and guided her into one of them. She was seated across from a man in a suit and a man dressed like an airline pilot. One of the agents took the seat next to her. The man in the suit said, "You're the indestructible girl." "I guess so, yeah." "So you're real?" Claire rolled her eyes. "Please don't ask me to cut myself." He held up both hands. No, I believe you. I mean, if you're sitting in the president's box for the State of the Union, then this isn't just a crazy gag. I figured it was some stunt for a new movie or something. The airline pilot was just staring out the window as the limo slowly pulled out. Sirens blared through the air, and red, white, and blue lights strobed across the car's windows as they drove down 15th Street. Claire found it almost hypnotic. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, hoping there might be a text from Gretchen Berg. There was nothing new. There hadn't been anything new since the 2 texts her former best friend had sent on the 14th of December. The first was a picture she'd taken of some tabloid or other on a supermarket rack. A picture of Claire and Gretchen on the campus of Arlington University was splashed across the front page with the headline, "Indestructible Girl in Love Nest with Co-Ed." The second text read, "How could you do this to me, Claire? They won't leave me alone. I never want to see you again." Under that were about 30 texts from Claire, all trying to get Gretchen to relent and respond. Still no reply. She sent another. "Please text me, Gretchen. Let me know you're okay. Please." It only took a few minutes to arrive at the Capitol. 5 more Secret Service agents joined the one in the car to escort the 3 of them inside to the president's box, which overlooked the House chamber. The room was huge, all wood paneling and quite lovely. Watching the speech on a computer monitor, which Claire had only done once, and then just because of a homework assignment, didn't give one an appreciation for how big the chamber was. 2 sections of seats were empty, and of the 3 seats on the main dais, only 1 was occupied by the Speaker of the House. The president would sit right in front of her, with the vice president on her right. The airline pilot and the other guy sat to Claire's right. To her left were the First Lady and the president's children. The First Lady smiled at her and said, "Welcome." "Thank you." "You look nervous." "Really?" She chuckled. "I don't feel nervous. She shook her head. "I don't know what I feel. This is really not what I expected my life to be like." Raising an eyebrow, the First Lady asked, "You mean before or after you realized you couldn't be hurt?" "Both." Claire looked away. "And I can get hurt, just not physically." A voice cried out from below. "Madam Speaker, the Vice President of the United States and the United States Senate!" vice president entered and sat down next to the speaker as about 100 people filed in to sit in one of the unoccupied sections. Claire figured that it wouldn't be quite all 100 senators, and sure enough, 4 seats were empty. After that, the dean of the diplomatic corps was announced, followed by the chief justice, and the rest of the Supreme Court and the cabinet. The one time Claire had watched the State of the Union, it had been on YouTube, and it had started with the president's actual speech, so she'd never seen the preliminaries before. It took about a half hour for everyone to be introduced and seated, and then finally came the words they'd all been waiting for. Madam Speaker, the President of the United States! It took quite a while for the president to make his way down the aisle, shaking hands and smiling and thanking people amidst thunderous applause. When he finally made it to the dais, the speaker formally introduced him, which led to more applause. Then at last, the president began to speak. The speech started with a litany of cliches and platitudes that Claire found herself utterly incapable of paying attention to. She briefly considered checking her phone to see if she'd heard from Gretchen, then decided against it. It's not like today is going to be any different. Gretchen had been her best friend, and Claire probably wouldn't have made it through the early days of college without her. But Claire had also gone public without consulting her, or even warning her. Now the president was talking about the airline pilot, who had apparently rescued several passengers after an emergency landing in the Atlantic Ocean. After the applause for him had died down, he glanced at her. Claire squirmed in her seat. Also with us is Ms. Claire Petrelli. Claire noticed that the president paused before saying her last name. No doubt the notes in front of him and the teleprompter both said Bennet. I'm sure you have all seen the video of Claire's dramatic jump off a Ferris wheel, and I'm sure you've seen the interview she's done in the month and a half since. But Claire is not unique. She's not a freak either. Claire is one of hundreds, possibly thousands, of evolved humans who walk among us. These EVOs have kept themselves hidden because they live in fear. Now, you might think they have little reason to be afraid. These are people who can fly, who can move at supersonic speeds, who can teleport from place to place, who can change the course of mighty rivers. But they're also people who are different. This country's history has been marred by an inability to accept that which is different, but it's also been blessed with an ability to move past that. People with skin the same color as me came here in bondage. The Constitution of the United States, as originally written, considered people who looked like me to be only 3/5 of a person. When immigrants from Western Europe, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, from Asia came over here, they were initially viewed with distrust and not considered real Americans. But we've been able to move past that. I'm not 3/5 of a person anymore. I'm President of the United States. Women can own property and vote. You don't see employment ads reading Irish need not apply. Not that we're all there. We still have a long way to go. And that is why these EVOs have felt the need to stay in the shadows. This administration was recently made aware of the existence of EVOs, thanks in part to the late Senator Nathan Petrelli. Mistakes were made, primarily by a rogue agent who has since passed away. I can assure you, the same mistakes will not be made twice. EVOs are people, just like us. Just like my ancestors who came to this country in chains, just like so many of your ancestors who came in boats or planes, hoping for a better life. The American dream isn't just for white people. It isn't just for landowners. It isn't just for men. It isn't just for heterosexuals. And it isn't just for people who don't have strange powers. It's for everyone. Which is why I'm going to urge Congress to pass the EVO Registration Act. Let me emphasize that this is not going to be a mandatory registration. What the act will do, assuming it is passed, is empower the Department of Homeland Security to collect information. Any EVOs out there who wish to register with the government may do so, but those who do not may choose not to, with no fear of reprisal. In addition, any EVOs who are convicted of a crime will be compelled to register as well. It is our hope that law enforcement agencies will be able to use this information to keep all Americans, EVO or not, safe. Claire just stared straight ahead. She hadn't expected this and wasn't sure how she felt about it. She had wanted to live out in the open. At least the president had made it clear that they weren't going to do what Emil Danko, the rogue agent the president had referred to, did, making warrantless arrests followed by imprisonment without trial. If Danko had had his way, all the gifted people, what did he call them? EVOs? Would be rounded up into prisons, even the ones who hadn't done anything wrong. But the president said that this new law would be voluntary. She hoped that would be the right thing. The speech went on, but she barely noticed any of it. A small voice in her head that sounded a lot like her father said, "You wanted to go public, Claire Bear. This is what happens." Chapter 4. 9 February 2011, The Bennet apartment, Arlington, Virginia. Noah Bennet came home just before 9 in the evening, his third 12-hour day in a row. Thanks to a recommendation from Lauren, the Department of Homeland Security had hired him as a consultant. Ever since Congress had passed the EVO Registration Act, DHS had been setting up registration centers in major cities throughout the country. Noah had so much experience dealing with special people, or EVOs, since it seemed that neologism of the president's speechwriters had caught on, that his advice had proven highly useful, both in terms of what to test for and how to defend against their powers if needed. For now, Noah's work was strictly advisory, but his boss had promised that he would be sent out into the field to check out the registration centers in person. On the one hand, it was good to be doing something. While Noah had no real money issues, whatever else one could say about the company, they had a fantastic retirement plan, and Noah's 2 decades working for them had given him a nice big 401k he could easily live off of for the rest of his life. But while he could survive without having to work, he could hardly call that living. He needed something to do. Luckily, DHS needed his help. They had no idea what they were doing. Everyone Homeland had assigned to the project got their knowledge of EVOs from comic books and movies. Noah was the only one with first-hand experience. It would be strange, though, to go into the field and not bag and tag. He fell more than sat on his couch and stabbed at the television remote. The box was already set on one of the 24-hour news stations. A woman in a maroon suit was, irony of ironies, discussing the EVO situation. Passed by Congress, and soon we'll be seeing registration centers opening up all over the country. So far, public opinion has been refreshingly positive, and a lot more EVOs have been coming out of the closet. Or I guess maybe it'd be better to say coming out of the phone booth? Anyhow, ever since Claire Petrelli's big jump here in New York, we've seen a bunch more EVOs be more public with their abilities. Not to mention a few old news stories that make a lot more sense now. But it still hasn't been determined who exactly the 2 Asian men were who apparently teleported the attendees of the Sullivan Brothers Carnival out of Central Park on that night in December. The internet has been taken to nicknaming them Tetsuo and Kaneda after the 2 main characters in Akira. But it's not all happy, shiny news. The head of that carnival was a man named Samuel Sullivan, and even as Claire Petrelli had been appearing on TV and radio and YouTube, Sullivan has been languishing in a prison without trial. Noah winced. How had they found out about that? The camera switched to a 2-shot, revealing that there was a wheelchair-bound guest sitting across from the newswoman. The guest was an older man with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, wearing a slightly rumpled suit. As she introduced him, he pushed his large plastic-framed glasses up his nose. With me is the lawyer for the Sullivan Brothers Carnival, Jacob Kurtzberg. And that answered Noah's question. For all of the peculiarities surrounding it, the carnival was still a business, and that usually meant some manner of legal representation. Kurtzberg said, "Thank you for having me." Jacob, can you tell us, please, what's happened to your client? Well, technically, the carnival is my client, but Samuel Sullivan is the legal owner of the carnival, and he was detained on the 7th of December of last year. He was arrested and brought to the NYPD's Central Park precinct, and then he was remanded into federal custody. He has not been arraigned. He has not been permitted to consult with his attorney, to wit, me. In fact, I can't even get a straight answer when I ask where he's being held. What was he charged with when he was arrested? I don't even know that! Kurtzberg had raised his voice, but immediately got himself under control, clearing his throat. Honestly, the only charge they can make stick is setting up the carnival without a permit, which is a misdemeanor. The carnival will happily pay the fine and make whatever other restitution the city of New York demands. But no such demands have been made. No such anything has been made. Angrily, Noah stabbed at the mute button on the remote. He took out his cell phone and contemplated calling the office. No, you're just a consultant. This isn't your problem. Instead, he called Kojin Sushi and made a takeout order. He supposed he could have had it delivered, but considering the Japanese restaurant in question was located on the ground floor of his very apartment building, such a request seemed the height of laziness. Once he'd ordered the shrimp tempura appetizer and a sushi dinner, he got up and walked over to the refrigerator to pour himself a glass of water from the filtered pitcher he kept there. Only after returning to the couch did he unmute the TV, mostly because Kurtzberg was done talking and the camera was centered on the newswoman. To Noah's horror, there was an image of Claire behind her. What now? When he hit the mute button once again, the woman's voice filled the room. Which tonight aired some old video footage of Claire Petrelli testing out her powers while wearing, of all things, a cheerleader uniform. His heart sinking, Noah watched as the screen cut to one of the videos that Claire and her friend Zach had made. Her jumping off an abandoned refinery on the outskirts of Odessa. The newswoman was talking over the video roll. The source of the video has only been identified by his online handle of Helby, and angrily, Noah turned the television off. He knew exactly who Helby was. Snatching his phone out of his pocket, he called his ex-wife at home. Naturally, Doug answered the phone, because Noah's day hadn't been crappy enough. Douglas residents, go for Doug! Noah forced himself to take a deep breath to center himself before responding. Hi, Doug. It's Noah. Is Sandra around? Oh, hey, Noah. Good to hear from you. Hey, that daughter of yours keeps showing up on my TV. She's made quite the stir, hasn't she? And to think she's actually my stepdaughter now. I gotta say, I've never been this close to anyone famous. While imagining all the ways in which he could kill Doug and dispose of the body such that it would never be found, Noah very quietly said, That's nice, Doug. May I please speak to Sandra? Oh, of course. No, not a problem. Hang on a sec. After the clunk of the receiver being put down, Noah waited several seconds, hearing distant, indistinct voices in the background. Yes, Noah? Have you talked to Lyle lately? Not since the semester started. Why? I just discovered that some gossip show aired Claire's old tapes that she and Zach made. The person who gave them the tapes has the internet handle HellB. At first, Sandra said nothing, but Noah could tell that she was turning it over in her mind, trying to figure out a way that it couldn't be Lyle. But she was probably also thinking of the bee with the devil horns that Lyle had been doodling ever since he was 11, when he realized that his initials were a homonym for that nickname. It was his go-to username on all social media. Finally, Sandra said, Let me talk to him. You sure? Because I'm perfectly happy to drive to his dorm and talk to him myself. Noah Bennett, you will do no such thing. Lyle's your son, not one of those Evos you like to bag and tag. He sighed. I'm not doing that anymore, Sandra. I don't care, Noah. Really, I don't. The only people I care about are Doug and Claire and Lyle. Doug's doing fine. I'll deal with Lyle. And as for Claire, well, I just need to turn on the TV to see how she's doing, don't I? Believe me, that wasn't my idea. Noah said weakly. Sandra certainly was getting all her digs in tonight. Oh, I know that much, Noah. You've had plenty of stupid ideas in your time, but even you're not that crazy. And speaking of stupid ideas, why is Claire going by Petrelli now? It's for our protection. Noah tried very hard to sound like he believed that. Sandra replied with the bitterest laugh he'd ever heard from her. Right! Because trying to protect the Bennett family has always turned out so well. Noah took off his horn rims and set them down on the end table, rubbing his eyes with his thumb and forefinger. Sandra, I'll talk to you later, Noah. As soon as I've talked to Lyle, I'll fill you in. And then she hung up. Noah took the phone away from his ear and just stared at it as if it would provide answers to how exactly his life got so screwed up. There were times when he wondered what would have happened if he had done as Kaito Nakamura had instructed and simply treated the child of Meredith Gordon and Nathan Petrelli as a company asset. If he had reported her abilities to the company when they manifested and given her back to them just as Kaito had instructed all those years ago. If he had been a good company man instead of a loving father. Then he remembered Elle Bishop. Her father, one of the founders, had given his daughter over to be used by the company, and she had grown up to become quite the sociopath. No, he had made the right choice. Regardless of the consequences, Claire had grown into a brilliant, compassionate, amazing young woman, and 20 years in the company told him that she never would have been allowed to do that under their thumb. Shaking his head, he put the phone in his pocket and went downstairs to get his dinner. Chapter 5. 6 September 2011, Union Wells High School, Odessa, Texas. Claire never thought she'd set foot in this school again. In fact, she never thought she'd set foot in her hometown again. The last time she had been there was when she confronted Seiler on level 5 of the company's headquarters located under Primatech Paper. Yet here she was, stepping out of a town car that had been parked right in front of her former high school. Hanging across the building's facade was a huge banner with her picture on it, which read, Welcome to Union Wells High School, the school of Claire Petrelli. She was met by the principal of the school, a very tall woman named Lori Pritchard. Claire looked up at her as they approached the entrance together. You do know I didn't actually graduate from here, right? Ms. Pritchard smiled, showing perfect white teeth. Let's just keep that to ourselves, shall we? It's been a huge help for recruitment and alumni donations, both of which took a big hit after that homicide when you were here. We need all the help we can get. No, that's fair. That's fine, I guess. Wasn't really Claire's concern in any case, and she could understand how enrollment might be an issue on a campus where someone had been killed. Lots of students transferred out after Jackie Wilcox was killed by Seiler, including, now that she thought about it, Claire herself. The principal led her through the hallways, which were surprisingly empty. Noticing Claire's confusion, Ms. Pritchard said, Everyone's already out on the bleachers, waiting for you. Claire nodded. After her starring role in the State of the Union address, she had been forced to hire a publicist, an intense young woman named Danielle Katz, as the requests for personal appearances were becoming overwhelming. Which was good, as Claire never would have heard from her former high school if Ms. Pritchard hadn't been able to contact Danielle. Luckily, Danielle was on the ball enough to recognize Union Wells for what it was, and sent that particular request straight up the ladder to Claire herself. As they turned toward the exit to the football field, Claire noticed a bulletin board filled with pictures of cheerleaders in the oh-so-familiar red and white uniforms. Peering closely, she saw a sign at the top of the bulletin board that read, Jackie Wilcox Memorial Cheer Squad. And the uniforms did have one new feature, a black band on the right arm. Nodding appreciatively, she followed Miss Pritchard as the principal pushed the metal bar that unlatched the door leading out to the football field. Even before the door opened, she could hear the noise of the kids sitting in the bleachers. Walking out to the 100-yard expanse of grass, Claire saw that the bleachers were filled with students, and a podium had been set up in the home goal area just under the uprights. Behind the podium, there was a bunch of assorted adults sitting in folding chairs. Claire recognized some of them as teachers she'd had when she was a student here. A giant red ribbon stretched across the goal line, held up by poles that had been stuck into the ground. And above the scoreboard in big black letters were the words, Petrelli Field. As Claire walked toward the home goal, a smattering of applause started somewhere in the bleachers. It slowly grew into a huge ovation. She shook her head. Ms. Pritchard whisper-shouted over the din of the applause. What's wrong? I still don't get why they're applauding. One person shouted, We love you, Claire! There were 2 empty chairs next to the podium, and Claire sat in one of them while Ms. Pritchard approached the microphone. Okay, settle down, she said into the mic. She could barely be heard over the crowd, but the noise level decreased quickly as the principal glared at the bleachers. Claire couldn't help but smile. The really talented teachers had teenager silencing abilities that to Claire seemed to be as much a superpower as her invulnerability, and obviously Ms. Pritchard was one of those. The bleachers were dead quiet within 10 seconds. Today we're honoring one of our most distinguished alumni. Claire Petrelli has shown tremendous courage in revealing her abilities to the public. She's become the face of the Evo movement, and I'm proud to have her here to inaugurate our newly remodeled football field. Claire was a cheerleader on the old field, and here she is to cut the ribbon for the new one. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Claire Petrelli. The applause started again, with many of the kids standing up as well. Claire smiled as she adjusted the microphone downward so it was closer to her face. Thank you, she said, hoping it would make the crowd quiet down. It didn't. She didn't have Miss Pritchard's power. So she waited them out. Eventually, they all stopped clapping and sat down, and she said, Thank you, again. I'm flattered by all this clapping, but I'm not really sure why you're doing it. One person screamed, 'Cause you're awesome! Several kids cheered at that. The thing is, I'm not. I'm just a girl. I was a cheerleader here, just like lots of other girls. I went to class, I did my homework, mostly. She smiled, and several people laughed, even Miss Pritchard. I had friends, I went to parties, I went to dances, and I cheered on the football team, just like lots of other girls. She looked down at her notes and took a deep breath. Last week, a woman in Hammond, Louisiana, who was able to stretch out parts of her body like a rubber band, rescued a girl and a cat from a tree. 2 weeks ago, a man in Bakersville, Virginia, who can hear a lot better than most people, heard a couple crying for help in an abandoned building and called 911. They'd been trapped for 3 days, but he was the only one who heard them. Last month, after a big rainstorm in Pueblo, Colorado, a man with tremendous speed cleaned out his neighbor's basement before the water damage got too bad. And just yesterday, in Warren, Michigan, a woman stopped a purse snatcher by creating an oil slick out of nothing. All of those people are also just normal people who happen to be Evos. Claire looked up at the sign above the scoreboard and sighed. I know it's called Petrelli Field after me, but as far as I'm concerned, this field is named after my father, Senator Nathan Petrelli, and my uncle, Peter Petrelli. They were the real heroes who tried to make the world a better place. My father died for it. Peter saved my life more than once. I hope that this new field will be a symbol for the new hope that everyone can live in peace together. Turning to look at Miss Pritchard, Claire saw the principal nod and get up from her folding chair. She joined Claire at the podium and brandished a large pair of scissors. One of the handles was red, the other white. Claire shook her head. Even the scissors are the school colors. Together, Claire and Miss Pritchard walked up to the big red ribbon that stretched across the goal line. The principal handed Claire the scissors, and Claire cut the ribbon with a flourish. The 2 ends slowly fluttered to the grass, and the crowd once again cheered. After the ceremony, Claire was brought over to a small table in the sun where students could come and meet her and ask for her autograph and have pictures taken with her. It felt like it took forever, though it turned out only to be an hour. She kept answering the same questions over and over again. The one she got asked the most was, of course, can you hurt yourself and then heal for us? Or something like that. Someone always asked that. usually a lot of someone's. At this point, Claire's stock answer was, there are like a million videos on YouTube. Just watch one of them. But it's not the same, which is what a lot of them someone said, but Claire was insistent. Eventually, the kids all went back to class, and Claire was free to go. Miss Pritchard walked her back to the town car, which was still parked in front of the school. Thank you again, Claire. This really meant a lot to the kids, and to the school. Claire gave the woman her brightest smile. It was my pleasure, Miss Pritchard. She even mostly meant it. After shaking the principal's hand, she climbed into the car. Airport? The driver asked. Nodding, Claire said, please. She'd flown in the previous night and stayed overnight at one of the hotels near the airport. Now she was flying to New York to meet with some doctors who wanted to test her blood. There'd been a lot of that. To Claire's mind, this whole insanity would be worth it if scientists could find a way to use her blood's healing properties to help people. As the town car drove down the streets she grew up on, Claire found herself thinking about Peter. She hadn't heard hide nor hair from him since Central Park. In fact, she'd barely seen him then, as he'd been busy trying to rescue the other carnies of Samuel's true, nasty nature. In fact, what really surprised her was how few of the Evos she actually knew had joined her in coming out. She would have thought that Hiro, at the very least, would embrace going public. But he and Ando had remained underground, as had Peter and his mother, Matt Parkman, Mohinder, Tracy, and the others. Claire wasn't really sure why. Maybe just because they've all been through so much. Still in all, she figured she'd take another shot at calling Peter. It would probably do as much good as texting Gretchen had. She had finally given up on that sometime in April, but she had to try. Peter was too important to her. Naturally, she got his voicemail. You've reached Peter's phone. Please leave a message. Hi, Peter. It's Claire. Again. Look, it's been 9 months, and I haven't heard a word. I've tried asking your mother where you are, but you know how she is. For someone who can see the future, she sucks at giving straight answers. Anyhow, I just need to know you're okay. Look, you don't have to tell me where you are. Just let me know that you're alive and okay, please? Things really are better now that we're out in the open. I just spent an hour being told by a bunch of high school kids how cool I am. Just, please, call me. She let out a long breath and said, bye, and ended the call. To be continued tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. The next 5 chapters in the novella will be tomorrow. In the meantime, check me out online at DeCandido.net, read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com, and please support me on Patreon. Patreon.com/KRAD. There's all kinds of cool stuff there, and you can only get it if you support me, and you'll love it. Trust me. Anyway, thanks very much. Please stay safe.